Hello, comics class. My focus will be on the underground comic Trashman, agent of the 6th International by the legendary Spain Rodriguez. One of the few underground comics heroes, Trashman fights the cops, Nazis, and special agents of a United States that has given way to absolute fascism and plutocracy. He is part of an urban revolutionary brigade that kicks ass and liberates territory in the name of socialism. Spain's work is defined by his New York working class roots and his own revolutionist ideals. It was, however, Spain's dark, gritty, and yet accessible art style which drew me to his work first. Spain was born Manuel Rodriguez in Buffalo, New York in 1940 to immigrant parents, his father from Spain and his mother from Italy. His father was an auto mechanic and his mother painted. According to Patrick Rosencrans in the Comics Journal, quote, he picked up the nickname Spain at around 12 years old when he heard some kids in the neighborhood bragging about their Irish ancestry. He defiantly claimed Spain was just as good as Ireland, so they began calling him that. It stuck, unquote. Ever since he was a kid, Spain loved comics and drawing. He especially liked Captain Marvel and EC Comics because he loved their imagination and how they made him think. He stopped reading comics when they instituted the Comics Code in 1954. As an adolescent, Spain got into trouble. He and other kids would shoplift from department stores and even steal cars. Speaking of this period in his life and his fraternity with the neighborhood boys that were his accomplices, Spain quotes in his interviews with Gary Groth in 98, it was basically hatred for established society. We just saw ourselves in a predatory world and we could trust one another. It was a sense of comradeship among the guys, but anybody else was just a potential victim. He got off pretty well though. He only spent a night in jail when he was 16. After high school, Spain went to the Silvermine Guild School of Art in Connecticut for 3 years, but he was unhappy there. He dropped out of art school and got a job at the Western Electric telephone wire plant near Buffalo. To quote again from the Groth interview, Spain said, I got just as much of an art education working at Western Electric for 5 years as I got at the Silvermine Guild School of Art. You got to see all the surreal machines and all this different wire being processed through the extruders and the spinners and all sorts of things. It isn't hard to imagine that Spain's work at the plant helped develop his signature mechanical intricacy in his art. At this time, Spain joined a bike gang called the Road Vultures, who rode around and got into barroom brawls often. He also went to anti-war protests and self-studied philosophy, Karl Marx impacting him strongly. He wanted to revolutionize the Road Vultures, but the second best thing was to try to give them new ways of thinking. For instance, he challenged some of the members' racist views about black people. Spain discovered East Village Other, an underground newspaper in New York in '65, not long after it began publication. Evo was a precursor to the soon-to-explode underground comics movement. It featured work from rising stars like Robert Crumb, Kim Deitch, who was Spain's roommate for a while in NYC, Trina Robbins, Gilbert Shelton, and Art Spiegelman. Spain's first published strip was at Evo called Zodiac Mind Warp in 1967 when he was 27 years old. It was at Evo where he also introduced Trashman, which he would continue to create for the next decade. Robert Crumb's Zap Comics took off in San Francisco in '68, acting as a pole star for the underground movement, and Spain was invited to work on Zap by its 4th issue. Here's the full group of Zap artists in the 80s. Spain is at the far right. Spain would go on to have a prolific career creating various autobiographical and historical comics like the compilation My True Story in 1994, Che, a graphic biography in 2008, and the bilingual Farm Worker Comics, a history of the farm labor struggle in California in 2014. He also collaborated on one of the first murals, if not the very first, in the Mission District in San Francisco, Horizons Unlimited, in 1972. Now to Trashman. Trashman was not always Trashman. In his former life, he was auto worker Harry Barnes, who one day comes home to find his wife murdered by pretty much the Gestapo. He vows to avenge her, and later that day meets Citizen X, agent of the 6th International, who agrees to train him in the parasciences. Here he is going through intense training. That gives him 2 powers. Not counting him also becoming extremely cool. The first being his random alert factor, which is a lot like Spidey senses. It helps him know when someone is approaching him from behind, or at one point it makes him duck just as a sniper pulls their trigger. The other is that he can change into last week's issue of Evo, which is pretty brilliant. So here, an evil agent is getting away, and unnoticed by the fleeing man, a copy of last week's East Village Other floats by, and then he materializes right in front of the man. Here he is doing the proletarian wiggle after a successful battle. There are a lot of city battles on streets with cars that have machine gun attachments. There's a strong theme of militarized vehicles. And there is a lot of action and carnage. Here a whole police force has Trashman surrounded. They give him 48 seconds to come out. Yet another one of his powers, that's just enough time for him to roll a joint. And here the elite are having a fancy dinner eating long pig, their euphemism for human. Between the frames of them enjoying human flesh, Trashman sets up a machine gun and mows them down. Here the road vultures get a little shout out. Also, Trashman has a lot of sex, along with his friend, the professor. There he is. Women are also almost entirely sex symbols in Trashman. At one point, an Amazonian-esque feminist military group headed by Nasty Elaine captures the two, he and the professor, and proceed to quote-unquote gangbang them, which they want. Spain was making quite a jab at the feminist movement and was by no means a feminist himself. It is jam-packed with action. Sex. Explosions. And simply kick-ass shit. To close, I loved Trashman, agent of the 6th International. I thought that such a fantastic combination of hilarious satire, political criticism, action, and frankly outstanding art simply did not exist. And I can say after reading Trashman, I am officially a fan of Spain Rodriguez, and I'll be reading more of his work very soon. And remember, fight the oppressor.